miles, I would say. Then you got to the southeast of both Lexington and Concord. That's when you got Boston. Now, from Boston going further south down, then you got Braintree. So Braintree, Massachusetts. Again, today it's called Quincy. Braintree, Massachusetts is about 25 miles southeast of Lexington. And I believe about, slightly a little less, between 5 miles, between 1 to 5 miles, you know what I'm saying, southeast of Concord or whatnot. So when you look at the map, as far as like all these different flanks, you got people that's coming from Braintree as well. So going back to the book, as far as like looking at it through the lens of Abigail, she was communicating what she was going through in the midst of that battle. You know what I'm saying? She was talking about like, well, I'm gonna say the episode. Well, I mean, because it happened for like damn near the entire day. But as far as like from her vantage point, she was saying like the soldiers, it was so fucking chaotic. Like shit was all messed up. People was like, militiamen was running all up in people's houses and places of residencies, which was normal at the time during battles and war. And, eating their food and gathering up whatever useful tools and ammunitions and guns and that type of stuff that they could utilize. And it kind of puzzled her and it scared her. You know what I'm saying? Like for example, by the time you get to the Bunker Hill battle, right? She actually witnessed that as well. Now I'm gonna go back to the facts of what happened leading up to that. Now, as far as like them chasing these British troops back, they did successfully make it to Charleston, and then through Charleston, Boston, because that's also north of Boston as well. See, I got confused when I looked, like when I first was reading the book and I'm taking down notes, and when they got to the point where they was talking about like the Charleston Peninsula, for example, right? Because that peninsula also, like the Charleston Peninsula itself, also borders the Massachusetts Bay, but it is also directly north. You know what I'm saying? It's directly north of Boston at the same time. So when they were saying like by the time these people made it to Boston through Charleston, I was confused thinking about the map, but then I didn't know that, you know what I'm saying, like it was still connected to the Charleston Peninsula at the same time. But as far as like the land area that they'll have to go through before they get to Boston, it was called Somerville. You know what I'm saying? So that's what had kind of lost me at the point at the time when I was reading this. But as far as like when they made it to Charleston and then through Boston, that's when it is classified historically as the Siege of Boston. And then that shit lasted a whole fucking year down there, at least 11 months, because they pretty much had the British enclosed within or surrounded in Boston. Because remember what I was saying as far as like all of those various flanks and factions of militiamen coming from different towns and directions and stuff like that. Now, a month from that point, actually 2 months after that, or was it in May? Nah, I'm gonna say June. About June the 13th, as far as the militiamen on the side of the Americans, they had found out what the British who were stuck in Boston was planning. They wanted to, move into the Charleston Peninsula. You know what I'm saying? And they felt like they have a good vantage position strategically, and it'll be a good reconnaissance move, because then they'll be in control of the Massachusetts Bay or whatnot. So because they found out about these plans, the American militiamen decided to occupy the Charleston Peninsula. Now, as far as on the map, when you think about the Charleston Peninsula, right at the, for lack of a better way of putting it, the entry there, you know what I'm saying, the border of it, you got Bunker Hill first, and then further into it, then you got Breeze Hill on the opposite side, damn near, you know what I'm saying? Not completely at the fucking coastal edge of Charleston, but it's like opposite of Bunkers Hill. 1,200 American militiamen decided to occupy Charleston. And it upset the British, and then that's when the Battle of Bunker Hill started 4 days later on the 17th of June. And it was a 3-part battle. If I got the date incorrect, like I said, I just put a header or something. I put it in the title or something, like, at this point I messed up on the date. But as far as like, the battle taking place, it was a 3-part battle. The first 2 times the British was kind of losing. And then the third time, the Americans basically just ran out of ammunition. And so the British ended up taking Charleston or whatnot within the midst of the siege of Boston. By the time you get to like the following year, which would be, what was it? March of 1776. That's when they had finally defeated the British, and they left Boston, and then they moved further northeast all the way into Canada as far as Nova Scotia. So it was a big victory for the Americans at the time, because now you're pushing the British further off. Now, then another major battle happened after that, as far as on this soil. It was called the Battle of Saratoga. Now, that happened in New York State, but the northern portion of the state or whatnot. That took place the following year. Now, that was like it was 1777, but between the month of September and October. So to be more exact, I would say, what was it? September. Well, from September all the way up until October 7th. And then 10 days from that point, on October 17th of 1777, the commander at the time, the British commander, his name was John Burgoyne. That's when he had finally, surrendered, because at this point, the Continental Army was more so organized. You know what I'm saying? And they were under the command of George Washington, who was the overall commander. Because, like, just before this battle, like going back a year prior, like as far as the Dutch, you know what I'm saying? Now, being that St. Eustatius is a colony, or was a colony, of the Dutch at that time, I feel like it still is a reflection of Dutch recognition. I think it was in November of that year, 1776. November of 1776. There was an American ship, and I believe the name, it was a brigantine ship by the name of Andrew Doria. And it had entered the harbor of St. Eustatius. And the Union flag was on this ship. And then the soldiers and officials of St. Eustatius at that time had saluted the flag. And the British took it as an offense, because they looked at it as like the Dutch recognizing rebels or whatnot. So they were already sort of at odds anyway. Now, this article, like, you could get, like, it's on Wikipedia. It's called Dutch Involvement in the American Revolution. Because, like, going back to 1774, for example, and I'm looking at my phone, hopefully it don't cut off. Going back to 1774, when the British felt some type of way about ammunition being brought to the Americas, as well as them coming and grabbing ammunition from the Dutch itself on their actual mainland territory in Amsterdam. You know what I'm saying? Like, that pissed the British off to the point where I want to say that same year, and possibly also September of 1774. I believe it was September of 1774. The British also had a warship stationed outside of Texel. Now, that was an island right outside of the Netherlands as well. But as far as like the relevance of this island, like all the transports that would go to St. Eustatius, you know, they would come from Texel first, you know what I mean, after leaving the Netherlands as well, you know what I mean, or the Republic of the Netherlands in general, you know what I'm saying, but especially the Netherlands or Amsterdam. Once they would leave Amsterdam, they would stop at Texel, and then from Texel, they would go to St. Eustatius as well. So the British, you know what I'm saying, like, you know, as a punitive move, I guess you could say, you know, they had two warships stationed outside of Texel to where they would just pretty much, you know what I'm saying, like harass them or whatnot. So that was that. As far as going back to like what took place after the Battle of Saratoga, well, actually, wait a minute. Going back to 1776, a little bit before, you know what I'm saying, the Dutch saluted the Grand Union flag. Also, that's when the independence was declared. That was July 4th of 1776. And Richard Lee had put that all into play or whatnot. And, you know, they were going to sign the bill prior to that. But, you know, on the first of the month, you know, they had it to where, you know, it was postponed so they could get a lot of the main signatures, such as like a Thomas Jefferson, etc., the John Adams, etc. You know what I'm saying? So it was finally signed on July 4th of 1776, declaring independence from Great Britain or whatnot. So now I'm trying to remember the exact day that the French recognized the United States as independent as well. Because as far as the Dutch, and I don't want to jump the gun to go too far, I'm trying to go in chronological order. As far as the Dutch, you know, officially, they declared or recognized the United States as being a sovereign nation. I believe that was April 19th of 1781, to be exact, because that's when the Dutch had accepted the credentials of John Adams at the time. So they were really the third country to, you know what I mean, to accept our, you know, in the United States as being sovereign. But I'm trying to remember the exact thing of the French. It's at the tip of my tongue. Oh shoot. It'll come to my mind later on. It don't matter. It'll come to my mind later on. But anyway, as far as like Saratoga, that battle ended October. That was like a two-phase major battle, pretty much or whatnot. And after that battle, that's when they pretty much officially got the British off American soil from that point. So then going back to the next year, which would be 1778. That's when John Adams, at this point, he was, as far as like his official position, according to the book, I forget the technical name, but according to the book, it translates pretty much to like being like a Secretary of War. But, you know, as far as like the title at that point, it was worded a little different. But again, that's basically was John Adams' position. But he got offered to be a part of an envoy to go to France and try to get more income to support the United States in their fight against the British. So John Adams ended up agreeing to do that at this point. Abigail was a little upset. She felt some type of way. She was unsettled by it. And so she thought it would be a good idea as far as like him going to Europe, going to France, Paris or whatnot, that her and the kids would just come along. Come to find out, the United States or the Congress at that point couldn't afford to pay for his entire family going there. So the decision between Abigail and John Adams was made for him to at least take his son, John Quincy Adams, with him. Now, what I was talking about earlier, now this is relevant as far as mentioning this. The reason why they thought, you know, because like I say, he was a precocious child, and, you know, highlighting or re-highlighting, you know, Abigail's attributes as far as like her mental capacity and her being studious herself. You know, I feel like this is relevant. They felt like it was a good idea to have Quincy Adams join his father on his mission because, like I say, not only was education a big thing that they instilled in Quincy, but she felt like it would be a good idea for him to also go out there and experience the world. Again, going back to that quote, the experiences opens up the mind's heart to feed the mind. Experiences opens up the heart to feed the mind's hunger for knowledge, like that type of stuff. So, and as far as like the more worldly, mundane conveniences of it, like he'll actually be present with his father. You know what I'm saying? Because who knows how long, his father would be out there, and then all the vital experiences that he would miss. So for those reasons, they felt like it was a good idea for Quincy to join his father or whatnot. So it was agreed upon for them to go out there. Now, at this point in the book, because like I said, this is still the beginning, and I don't want to mess up the chronological order. They speak about him leaving February 13th, if not the 7th. Let me see. I'm going to say February 13th is where they departed. And they got on an actual frigate. And the name was the Boston frigate or whatnot. So they left on the 13th. 6 days later into the journey is when they spotted 3 British frigates or ships in the horizon. Now, they say that a chase ensued or whatnot. Now, at this point in the book, like I said, I don't want to disrespect the book, and so I'm trying to keep in the order of the book. I believe this is when they paused for a second, and then they started going into like the history of his family. You know what I'm saying? Like his family history or whatnot. And they went back as far as, I want to say, the 12th century. You know what I'm saying? They went back as far, no, actually they went further than that. They went to the 11th century. Yeah, I believe the 11th century. And, going in chronological order, I'm not going to go into their whole history and all that type of stuff because it's a lot. But as far as like one thing that I will point out, it's like that a person that was a part of their lineage, his name was Thomas Boyston. And he had a son named Zabdiel Boyston as well. And they both were doctors. I know at least his son was. And his son is credited with performing the first, this is in the book, by the way, the first gallbladder surgery as well as the first breast surgery. And I think he performed the gallbladder surgery first. That had to be around 1710. And then the breast surgery, he performed that in 1717 or whatnot. But to make a long story short, it was a black African slave. His name was Onesimus, I believe. Onesimus. Onesimus. Now, he was a slave that had been imported from West Africa. Now, I forget the exact country. But the relevance of this is this. He had a slave master. His name was Mather Cotton, I believe. And, the slave master found out, like, he basically put his slave master on game, how to cure a virus. Now, during this time, you had the smallpox disease that would happen and that would kill people or whatnot. And it wasn't a cure for it. So one time, somehow this slave communicated this to his slave master. His slave master, through the grapevine, ended up communicating this to Zabdiel Boyston. He found it to be extremely interesting. So he started experimenting on people by just, you know, taking like, basically introducing a little dose of smallpox into a person, basically. And then their body would develop a natural immunity against it. And I found that to be so interesting. To make a long story short, as far as Zabdiel Boyston, you know, he got caught doing that. He got in trouble. He got locked up or whatnot. He was told not to do it. He still ended up doing it anyway. And he, like, experimented on a couple of hundred people or whatnot. So then later on, he ended up moving to London, and he gained recognition from that. He ended up blowing up, and he became almost like basically like a pioneering figure. But it is documented that that knowledge or that formulaic approach to combating diseases came from that slave. Now, I thought that was so fucking interesting, and not to make this like, you know, racial or nothing like that, because like I say, my purpose for this is just brushing over American history, but trying to do it with absolute brevity, but not, you know, be cheap with it at the same time. You know what I'm saying? But it's, anyway, not to make this racial. When I read about that, it puzzled me because, again, like I always say, I heard a lot of different stuff in my lifetime before. And one of the conversations that came to my head, it's on YouTube. It's a pretty old conversation, a couple of years ago, if not a few years ago. But you had R.A. the Rugged Man and another host, and they had a guest on their show. They had a white supremacist. His name was Jared Taylor. You know what I'm saying? He's somewhat popular, but not really. But they had him on his show or not. And I heard a lot of his stuff before too. Just me exploring the ideas because I like to think about stuff. They had him on this show. So it brought that up to my mind because when Jared Taylor and R.A. the Rugged Man was going back and forth, they was talking about like, you know, like racial contributions to the world pretty much. And Jared Taylor was making the point that, you know, Africa didn't really bring nothing to the world in terms of originality. And then a lot of the cultural gangs that came later in Africa, aside from the Romans, etc., and those prior to them, also came from the Arab Spring in the 7th century. And he was saying that before the 7th century, below the Sahara Desert, he didn't have no type of history whatsoever. That was his point of view or whatnot. And so when R.A. the Rugged Man was going back and forth with him, you know, he brought up like you know, black inventions and stuff like that. And Jared Taylor tried to, you know, but it was kind of like the cliche stuff. No disrespect. But, you know what I'm saying? He was trying to make the point. But he brought up some cliche inventions or whatnot. Jared Taylor kind of played them off a little bit. Not even played them off, but he was like, oh, you're talking about one of these books that talks about the stoplight or the red light, you know, or this or that, blah, blah, blah. He was like, basically, he was saying, like, you think those are impactful inventions, and they're not. And then he started making a reference to, like, other inventions from non-blacks, particularly whites. And he used Oprah Winfrey to, you know, drive the point in deeper, and was saying if it wasn't for all these white inventions, computers, all this type of shit, that Oprah Winfrey would be stuck in Africa with her African pals or some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Now, me, like I say, just thinking about this, it just brought that in my mind. I was thinking, I'm like, shit, that's interesting that nobody points this out. Because it was the first time I ever heard about this as far as this guy. I'm like, that's a big fucking deal. Now, it's unfortunate, and like I say, I'm getting back to the book, but like I say, I like to veer for a little bit and touch on certain things that I find interesting. In my mind, I'm like, okay, granted, it's bogus that Zabdiel Boyston got the credit back in the day, but just for the sake of avoiding any type of waste of time, it is a fact today in 2021. It is a undeniable fact that Onesimus invented, well, not invented that, but, you know, he introduced that knowledge to his slave master, and fortunately for the annals of history, it became naked fucking precedent. That's my way of describing it. Now, the reason why that's so fucking significant is because, and again, this is no like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I respect, you know what I'm saying? Open, I'm the most open-minded motherfucker that you ever gonna find, excuse my language. You know what I'm saying? I just like to listen to stuff. I don't get too emotional on ideas. I just don't get emotional. You know what I'm saying? I look at reality. I consider myself a straight realist. You know what I'm saying? But as far as like this guy, because I don't want to mess his name up, Onesimus. You think about that shit, he didn't come up with that formula. That was something that he was born into. A certain group of people, a culture or whatnot, a small community, regardless of the size of the community, these people had some type of medical knowledge in terms of an approach on how to remedy diseases. When you think about stuff like that, I don't think that I think it's unlikely that was something that was invented even outside of Onesimus himself. I highly doubt that invention from that point going back in reverse was no older than 50 years. I doubt that shit. Basically what I'm saying, whatever culture that he came from within West Africa, that's a knowledge that got lost. That is a original formulaic approach that has never been sufficiently documented in history. And as far as my knowledge, if I am incorrect, I will readjust myself in the future when the facts hit me. But as far as my knowledge, there is no other example throughout human history, and I dare go back as far as 160,000 years. And I know about the skull fractures in Europe. That's for a whole different blog. You know what I'm saying? I'm not even getting to that right now. But as far as like this formulaic approach of remedying a disease and develop a natural immunity to them by just ingesting, like taking small samples of, you know, blood, whatever, lick whatever, you know what I'm saying? Put that shit in your body and affecting yourself with it, but not too much of a dose, and then you develop a defense against that. That's a precedent. There's no other historical example that I know about. Now, when you talk about impactfulness, this is just my opinion. When you talk about impactfulness of inventions, if you compare that in itself, like you talk about like, okay, a remedy. Oh, I thought my phone cut off. No, it didn't. You talking about a remedy to a disease as opposed to an invention or inventions of convenience. You see the difference? I would argue, regardless of what the invention is, if it amounts to something that either facilitates or serve as a convenience. You know what I'm saying? To anywhere from an extreme degree to something as fucking small as a remote control. You take that whole comparison from the extreme to the minute or the less extreme, the invention, or not invention, but like the knowledge of that formulaic approach far knocks that shit out the fucking ball field somewhere. You know what I'm saying? So again, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, shit. I mean, what he came up with was, you know, the precedent that he set that got recorded in the history is much more impactful than something that, you know what I'm saying, makes it easier for you to operate in terms of a invention, even if it's a fucking light, you know, or electricity. You know what I'm saying? You got something that's more so direct in terms of saving lives as opposed to something else that helps you, you know, navigate and helps your senses and some shit. You know what I'm saying? But again, what he came up with is something that mitigates that which can be fatal. I don't know. That's just how I see it. But anyway, yeah, that was like one of the people that throughout, you know, his family lineage or whatnot. And like I said, I just wanted to point that out because I like the example of, or the story about Onesimus. But going back to this chase. So in the book, 6 days into sea, or the Atlantic Ocean, they spotted 3 British ships. These ships chased them for 2 days, actually 2 nights. By the second night, they had lost the ship or whatnot. And